You'd never notice the Hale house on first glance. Tucked neatly between two identical homes in a picture-perfect suburban neighborhood, it looked like every other place where laughter echoed on weekends, kids ran through sprinklers in the summer, and dogs barked happily from fenced-in yards. In fact, that's exactly what it was. Until it wasn't. If you believe a single voice can shake the silence of the world, subscribe now. If you don't, explain in the comments why you've chosen the comfort of silence over the weight of truth. The Hale family seemed to live a life most people would envy. Marcus Hale, early 40s, an HVAC technician with a steady hand and a trustworthy smile. His wife, Dana, a local school teacher known for her calming voice and homemade cookies during PTA meetings. And their three children, Jamie, Lucy, and Aaron, each a glowing product of warmth and discipline. Even their golden retriever, Max, was part of the charm. He was the dog who fetched newspapers and wore a Christmas sweater every year. To the outside world, they were the American dream in motion. But the thing about dreams is that they can turn into nightmares, silently and swiftly. And this one did. It began with quiet changes. Minor at first, Marcus became more withdrawn. He stopped chatting with neighbors during yard work, started skipping out on weekend BBQs, claimed work was taking more out of him lately. Stress, people said, happens to everyone. Then came the privacy. Curtains that used to stay open were suddenly shut tight day and night. Cameras appeared on the corners of the house. Dana, once active at school events, started calling in sick. The kids stopped playing outside. No more bike rides. No more sidewalk chalk drawings. Just quiet. Too quiet. Still, no one knocked. No one called. Because in suburbia, boundaries are holy, and everyone wears a mask. What neighbors didn't know was that inside that home, the air had shifted. Marcus had grown obsessed with something. He began journaling in notebooks filled with erratic writing and cryptic codes. He stayed up late into the night on conspiracy forums, hunting for patterns no one else could see. There was talk of cleansing, of saving them, of the noise finally stopping. He believed something was coming, a reckoning, and he believed it was his job to protect his family, not from it, but through it. Dana tried. For months she tried. There were arguments, some so loud they echoed through the neighborhood. One night, a neighbor heard glass shatter and Dana scream. The next morning, she waved from the porch like nothing had happened. Denial is easier than confrontation. The kids, they started missing school. 1 week turned to 2. When the school called, Dana said they had the flu. When a teacher offered to drop off homework, Dana said they'd be fine. No need. That was the last anyone heard from them. The house that once radiated joy now pulsed with an invisible pressure, as if it were holding its breath, as if something inside was rotting. Then one evening, a smell began drifting from the backyard. Faint, earthy, wrong. But this is suburbia. People don't report smells. They don't ask questions. They mind their business. And so no one knocked. No one called. Until 3 weeks later, when a relative, concerned by the silence and blocked calls, requested a welfare check. Police arrived expecting a sick family, maybe a domestic dispute. What they found was a locked house, mail piling at the door, and an unnatural stillness. The officer knocked. No answer. He walked around back. That's when he saw the soil, freshly turned, in lines too precise, too shallow. He radioed for backup. Inside the house, dinner plates still sat on the table. Half-eaten food, TV remote on the couch. Family photos still hanging, but no voices, no footsteps, only silence. A silence so heavy it felt like it had a pulse. What they would uncover in that home, and beneath its backyard, would go on to horrify a nation. But this was only the beginning. The facade was cracking, not all at once, but in soft, silent pieces. From the outside, Marcus Hale still looked like a man just dealing with stress. Late hours at work, money tight, 3 kids needing attention. But what no one realized was that Marcus wasn't just unraveling. He was rotting, from the inside out. And his decay wasn't loud. It was invisible, patient, infectious. He began muttering to himself. That's how it started. Quiet, harmless. Dana once walked in on him, whispering in the bathroom mirror. Nothing clear, just soft streams of nonsense. She laughed it off, joking about sleep deprivation. But he didn't laugh. He stared back at her like he didn't recognize who she was. He started writing obsessively, not journals, manifestos, his notebooks filled with diagrams, timelines, equations. Not scientific, but spiritual, at least in his mind. There were pages titled "The Noise Must Die" in The Price of Freedom. He created schedules, rituals. He scribbled down dreams, fragments of voices, random numbers that appeared to follow him. He taped pieces of paper on the walls of their bedroom, notes he claimed were instructions. Dana tore them down one night in a panic, and Marcus didn't speak to her for 3 days. The silence wasn't angry. It was cold, calculated. He began isolating. He removed every mirror in the house, disconnected the internet, boarded up the attic. He said he was protecting the family from outside influence, from what's coming. The kids, confused and frightened, were forced to stay indoors. Their phones were taken, books removed, the windows painted black. Marcus began to lock the front door with a key from the inside. Even Donna wasn't allowed out without permission, and she was slipping too, not in madness, but in fear. She was stuck with a man who was no longer her husband, no longer a father, just a presence, one that watched, one that judged. At night, he would sit in the living room in complete darkness. He wouldn't sleep, just stare at nothing. One night, Dana heard him speaking softly to the dog, whispering as if confessing something. When she crept down the hall to listen, all she heard was, "They don't understand, Max, but they will. Soon." She stopped confronting him after that. There was nothing to say. The house had turned into something between a prison and a shrine. But what it worshipped wasn't God or love or healing. It worshipped silence. The more Marcus decayed, the more the house changed with him. Light bulbs were removed, not broken, just unscrewed. The pantry began to thin out. The children were only allowed to eat when Marcus said so. He began preparing their meals himself. Always the same food, same portions, same time. It was control. Every breath in the house was regulated by one man, and that man was slipping into something monstrous. He no longer saw his children as individuals. They became units. He referred to them by numbers in his notebook. Not Jamie, Lucy, and Aaron, but 1, 2, and 3. He spoke to them less and less, and when he did, it was commands. Sit still. Don't speak until spoken to. Close your eyes. Do not cry. The dog, Max, began to cower whenever Marcus entered the room. At one point, Marcus locked the dog in the basement for 2 days, claiming it was too loud. Dana begged him to let Max out, and Marcus did, but not before she agreed to stay silent for the rest of the week. Silence was now currency in the Hale home, and fear was the only language spoken. But Marcus wasn't just spiraling into madness. He was planning. There was something disturbingly methodical in the way he moved. Each day had structure. He would dig in the backyard for hours, claiming he was planting things that mattered. Sometimes he'd come back inside covered in dirt, fingernails filled with soil, eyes red. No one asked him questions anymore. One afternoon, Lucy, only 8, cried out that she wanted to go back to school, that she missed her friends. Marcus didn't yell. He simply walked up to her, knelt beside her, and whispered something in her ear. No one ever knew what he said, but Lucy never asked again. In fact, she never spoke out loud again. Whatever broke inside Marcus had now infected his children with fear so deep, it became submission. Dana tried to escape once. She waited until Marcus was in the backyard. She quietly opened the door and nudged her youngest, Aaron, toward it. But Marcus was always watching, even when he wasn't there. He appeared in the doorway like a ghost without a word and took Aaron by the wrist. That night, he didn't hit her. He didn't scream. He just stood over her in the bedroom while she sobbed and said, "This isn't punishment, it's protection. I'm keeping us safe. The world is poison. We're the cure." The next day, he began boarding the back door shut. The family was now sealed inside their own home, their grave. In one of his notebooks, later recovered by police, Marcus wrote a line repeatedly, When the silence is complete, we'll be clean. We'll be whole again. He underlined complete 6 times. Marcus Hale had stopped being a father. He had stopped being a man. He believed he was a purifier, a savior, the conductor of a final silence. And his final symphony was already written. He began preparing meals with precision. Everyone got the same thing, same drink, same time. Dana noticed a bitter taste, but said nothing. She was too scared to speak. The children, now mere shadows of who they once were, had sunken eyes and pale skin. They no longer asked for cartoons. They no longer laughed. They sat, ate, and waited. Like ghosts, like they already knew. Even the pets, Max and the family cat, Pepper, were unusually quiet, restless. They sensed something no one else could. The house was a coffin waiting to be nailed shut. Marcus had erased joy, erased hope, erased names. He hadn't killed anyone yet, but something far worse had happened. He had already buried them, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. All that was left was the act itself, and Marcus Hale was ready. It was a Thursday night. A still, unnatural quiet wrapped around the Hale residence, like a burial shroud. There was no wind, no passing cars, not even the bark of Max, the dog who once filled the evenings with excitement. Everything inside that house had already died in spirit. But what was coming next would end what little was left. Inside, the house was a monument to stillness. Each room stripped of life. The children, no longer playing or speaking, had been confined to their rooms, the door handles replaced with slide bolts on the outside. Marcus called it safety. Dana called it something else, though she never said it out loud anymore. The TV hadn't been turned on in weeks. The power in certain parts of the house had been shut off entirely. Marcus said they didn't need light anymore. "The world's too bright," he once whispered. "It blinds the truth." But on this night, Marcus was different. He moved with eerie calm, no longer pacing, no longer muttering. He seemed at peace, as if something he'd been building toward had finally arrived. He wore all black, even though there was no one to hide from. He stood in the hallway for over an hour, just standing, in the dark, watching each closed door, listening, savoring. In the kitchen, he prepared dinner. It was chicken and rice, the same meal they'd had for the past 3 nights. But this time, the rice had a bitter undertone, something earthy, something off. He placed the plates on a tray, arranged neatly, and moved silently from room to room. He knocked once. No answer. He entered anyway. He served each of them, one by one, his wife, his children. Dana watched him closely. There was something different in his eyes, something cold, final. She barely ate. Her instincts screamed at her to stop. She glanced down at her children. Jamie was already halfway through her meal. Lucy was chewing slower than usual. Aaron had barely touched his plate. Dana's stomach churned. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Later, she would say she could taste death in that rice. Within 45 minutes, it began. Lucy was the first to complain. Her eyes burned, her stomach cramped. She collapsed in the hallway trying to reach the bathroom. Jamie started vomiting shortly after. Aaron began shaking uncontrollably. Dana was screaming now, something she hadn't done in weeks. She rushed to her children, trying to help them. But she was weak too, dizzy, slow. That's when Marcus appeared again, calm, silent, gloved. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He simply stood over them, watching. Dana begged him for help. She grabbed his arm. He didn't move. "They're almost free," he whispered. She tried to run, but she made it only 2 steps before Marcus wrapped his arm around her neck from behind and dragged her into the kitchen. Her head hit the tile. Hard. The room went black. By the time she came to, the house was darker than ever. The hallway light was out. The only sound was a faint rhythmic scraping outside the back door. Why haven't you subscribed yet? Drop a comment below and let us know what's holding you back. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Metal on soil. Marcus was digging. She crawled to the window. Through the slats, she could just barely see him. His silhouette hunched over, dirt flying, pile after pile. He was working quickly, like he'd done it before. Her children? Still. Jamie lay face down. Aaron was curled in the corner. Lucy's eyes were open, glassy, staring at nothing. Dana couldn't scream anymore. She couldn't move. Every sound died in her throat. Her hands trembled as she reached for a phone. But every line was dead. The wires had been cut. She collapsed beside her son and waited. The next morning, neighbors would say they saw Marcus outside, watering the lawn like nothing had happened, whistling, shirtless, dirt still under his fingernails. That night, the rest of the work continued. He carried their bodies into the yard one by one, each wrapped in a bedsheet, each labeled, crudely, with duct tape across the chest. 1, 2, 3. Mother. Even Max and the cat, Pepper, had their own burial spots. The pets had been poisoned days earlier, and no one noticed. He laid them in the holes he'd been digging for weeks, carefully, respectfully, like he was putting away delicate heirlooms. The notebook found later detailed the ritual. The extinction protocol, he called it, a checklist. Sedate the family, wait for silence, prepare them for rebirth, bury the past, clean the soul. He even drew diagrams of the backyard, marking each grave precisely. A row of rectangles, aligned with the house, aligned with something. He believed this was a sacrifice, not for evil, but for salvation. He thought he was saving them from the static of the world, the chaos, the corruption, the noise. The only way to preserve them was to stop everything, forever. By the third night, all the graves were covered, grass seeds scattered on top, as if he was planning for things to grow again, as if something beautiful could ever rise from that dirt. He set the table the next morning, 5 plates, 5 glasses. He sat in his usual seat, ate quietly, smiled at the empty chairs. Then he cleaned up, took a shower, and dressed in his Sunday clothes, and waited. Police arrived at 4:37 p.m. for the wellness check. He opened the door before they knocked, said only one thing: "They're safe now." Inside, the house was spotless, every surface wiped clean. No blood, no struggle. The only evidence something was wrong came when one officer opened the back door and noticed the way the earth had shifted. The smell hit them before the realization did. Freshly turned soil, covered just enough to blend, just shallow enough to smell. They began digging immediately, with their bare hands, and what they uncovered didn't just break protocol, it broke them. A child's hand, a sheet-wrapped body, a dog's collar with dried blood, labels, order, intent. Even seasoned homicide detectives stepped away from the scene, unable to speak. This wasn't rage, this wasn't impulse. It was ritual. Marcus Hale was arrested without resistance. No fight, no confusion. He looked them in the eyes and said calmly, "You can't punish me. I set them free." And with that, the nightmare was no longer speculation. It was real. It had happened. And no one, not the family, not the neighbors, not even the investigators, would ever be the same again. The yard wasn't supposed to matter. It was just grass, a place for birthday parties, inflatable pools, chasing the dog at dusk. But on that day, and the day officers arrived, the yard became something else. A crime scene, a cemetery, a graveyard with a beating heart. It was late afternoon when police received a second welfare check request. Marcus had opened the door before they even knocked, standing in neatly pressed clothes, face eerily calm. Behind him, the house sat in perfect silence, unnaturally still, like the aftermath of a funeral. When the officers stepped inside, the first thing they noticed was the cleanliness. Too clean. The furniture was aligned precisely. The kitchen counters wiped spotless. Family portraits remained on the walls, staring like ghosts from a time long gone. But something was off. No voices, no sounds of children, no barks. The air inside was stale, heavy, the kind of air that hadn't moved in days. Then came the backyard. One of the officers, while walking around the exterior, paused. He noticed the grass. A patch of it, wide and rectangular, was slightly darker than the rest, softer underfoot. The earth had been disturbed, recently, repeatedly. He called for backup. Within minutes, gloves were pulled on, shovels retrieved, and with the first stroke of the spade, the nightmare surfaced. Not metaphorically, literally. 6 inches down, they hit something soft. A sheet, duct tape, a human hand, small. The officer dropped his shovel. By the time they uncovered the first body, a child wrapped in bed linen, labeled crudely with black marker. Other officers had arrived, forming a perimeter around the home. Digging continued. Another grave, and another. By the time the sun set, they had uncovered 6 bodies, 4 humans, 2 animals. Each body placed methodically, each plot measured evenly. The dog's grave had a collar hanging on a stick beside it. The cat was found wrapped in a child's blanket, buried last, as if even the family pet was part of the order Marcus had created. One officer reportedly vomited. Another collapsed to his knees. These were not just murders. They were organized, ritualistic, disturbing in their precision. The house was immediately sealed. Crime scene tape wrapped around the property like a noose. Forensic teams moved in, not to look for signs of a struggle. There were none. But to understand the mind that could orchestrate something this perfect. They found notebooks, dozens of them, hidden in drawers under floorboards, taped behind furniture, each filled with rambling, meticulous thoughts, instructions, schedules, philosophy. He called the plan the quietening. Each family member had a page dedicated to them, not with memories but measurements, sleeping patterns, emotional triggers, suspected resistance levels. Even the pets were profiled. In one notebook, Marcus wrote, "The world is static and poison. The louder it gets, the more they suffer. I won't let them suffer anymore. I'll return them to zero." Another page dated 2 weeks before the murders. "I'm not killing them. I'm ending the noise. They will thank me in silence." The media exploded. Within hours of the discovery, news vans lined the block. Drones hovered over the house. National outlets picked up the story with headlines that didn't even feel real. Suburban father kills entire family, including pets, buries them in backyard. American nightmare. Family of 5 erased in one night. They're safe now. Father confesses to chilling mass murder. Journalists, neighbors, true crime fanatics, all came in swarms. But the house never spoke. It remained still, unmoving, like the dead inside it. Investigators continued combing through the property. They reconstructed the timeline using Marcus's notes, combined with surviving phone data and utility records. The power cuts, the food orders, the last internet activity. It all pointed to a man who had planned this for over 7 months. One chilling discovery was made in the garage. Large printed photographs of the backyard, taken from multiple angles. On each photo, Marcus had scribbled numbers and grave markers. He'd rehearsed the burial, drawn it, practiced it. He wasn't just digging holes. He was building a map of silence. When autopsies came back, they confirmed what officers feared. The victims had been sedated. No signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds. The children had died painlessly, in their sleep or shortly after eating. The wife, Dana, suffered minor bruising consistent with a blunt head injury, but was ultimately also drugged. Toxicology reports revealed the same compound in every body, a powerful sedative mixed into food, traceable but undetectable by taste unless you knew what to look for. No fingerprints were found on the mixing utensils except Marcus's. There were no accomplices, no outside help, no signs of forced entry. This was not a man who broke. This was a man who believed. Marcus didn't try to escape. He didn't hide the bodies. He waited as if expecting someone to arrive and understand. But no one did. He was placed under suicide watch, held in solitary, and refused all interviews except for a single court-appointed psychiatrist. What he said chilled even the seasoned professional. They were screaming, even when they weren't speaking. "I just wanted to hold them still. Forever. The world breaks people. I fix them." He claimed he could still hear them. Not in pain, not angry, just quiet, just grateful. The courtroom phase hadn't even started yet, but Marcus Hale's name was already carved into the dark hall of American family annihilators. The kind who don't kill for jealousy or rage, but out of a twisted sense of duty. out of love. One neighbor during a police interview whispered, "I walk past that yard every morning. I said good morning to him. While his family was buried 6 feet away, he smiled at me." To this day, the Hale house remains vacant. The new owner who bought it at a government auction gutted it, but couldn't remove the concrete over the graves. No one plays on that street anymore. Children cross to the other side when walking to school. No one trick-or-treats there. No realtor will list a home nearby without dodging questions. And the grass, no matter how often it's cut, grows thicker in the back than anywhere else, as if the ground remembers, as if the yard is still breathing. And for those who witnessed what came out of it, they swear they can never unsee those duct tape labels. They never forget the smell. They never forget the spacing, the symmetry, the stillness. Marcus Hale didn't just bury his family. He built them a monument of silence, and to this day, the garden still whispers. But only to those who dare to listen. Marcus Hale never ran. He never resisted. And when police arrested him, he didn't protest or weep. He didn't even blink. He stood there at the threshold of his crime, neat, clean, expressionless, like a man who had finally finished a long day's work, as if burying his family was the end of something, not the beginning. And in many ways it was. It was the end of normalcy, the end of sanity. And for many people involved, from neighbors to first responders, it was the end of peace. From the moment Marcus was taken into custody, it became clear. This wouldn't be a trial about guilt. There was no doubt, no question of who did it. The question became, why? Why would a seemingly loving father, a mild-mannered husband, a man who'd never had a criminal record, orchestrate the silent extinction of his entire family? No one had the answer. Not the police, not the therapists, not even Marcus. Or maybe he did. He just didn't care to share it. The interrogation, silence as a weapon. During the initial interrogation, Marcus said almost nothing. No anger, no remorse, no excuses. When asked why he did it, he smiled faintly and responded, "They were never going to survive the world. I made sure they didn't have to." When pressed, he elaborated, "Noise breaks the mind. You don't hear it yet, but they did. Every day, I set them free." That was the last meaningful thing he ever said. After that, silence. Complete, terrifying silence. He refused legal counsel, refused to sign statements, sat in his holding cell hour after hour, drawing the same image over and over. 6 rectangles in a row, labeled, aligned, each one colored in black ink until the page bled. Some say he was insane. Others said he was beyond insanity. He was something else, something hollowed out, like his soul had been erased long before he dug the first grave. The trial no one wanted. When Marcus Hale stood trial, the courtroom was filled, not with anger or protest, but with dread. The surviving family members who attended wept so quietly it felt like the room was mourning with them. The jury avoided looking him in the eye. Even the judge had to pause more than once before delivering statements. Prosecutors laid out the facts, the timeline, the autopsies, the notebooks, the method. They showed photos, blurred but still horrifying, labeled bodies, shallow graves, the pet collars, the burial diagrams. Marcus sat motionless throughout. He blinked but never reacted. When it came time for his defense, there was none. His public defender stood briefly, only to confirm that Marcus had refused all psychiatric evaluations and insisted on pleading guilty. Not insane, not coerced, just guilty. When asked by the judge if he understood the consequences, Marcus said, "It doesn't matter anymore. They're clean. I'm the static now." The judge sentenced him to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. But what haunted the courtroom more than the crimes was the way Marcus smiled when the sentence was read. Not joyfully, not defiantly, but like someone who just finished a painting, stepped back, and decided it was complete. Aftermath, the haunting that remains. Marcus was placed in a maximum security prison under suicide watch, where he remains to this day. His cell is described as eerily minimal, No books, no radio, no talking, just him and the white walls. Prison guards report that he sits on his bunk from morning until night, staring straight ahead. Sometimes he hums. Sometimes he draws on his skin using bits of graphite he hides from pencil tips. Always the same 6 boxes, always the same order. He does not respond to letters. He does not take visitors. He does not speak. It's as though Marcus Hale didn't survive that house either. What lives in that cell now is just the shell. But outside those prison walls, the damage never stopped. A family erased Dana's sister, who now speaks on behalf of the victims, once said in an interview, "He didn't just kill them, he erased them, their laughter, their futures, their voices. He dug holes for everything they ever were." There were no funerals, not in the traditional sense, because by the time their bodies were returned, no one wanted to see what was left. Closed caskets, private ceremony, no flowers, and no burial. The family was cremated, not by request, but by necessity. The soil had done too much damage. The evidence had stayed in the ground too long. All that remained was ash. The house, a place that no one claims. The Hale house was auctioned off for a fraction of its worth. No one wanted it. The first buyer backed out after stepping into the backyard. The second owner gutted the interior, trying to wipe the past clean. But even paint couldn't cover what had happened. Neighbors say the lights still flicker at night. Some say they hear dogs barking, even though no pets live there. One neighbor swears she heard children's laughter on Halloween, even though the street hasn't had trick-or-treaters since the murders. The backyard grass grows uneven, the ground settles strangely, and the birds, usually so loud in spring, never seem to land on the fence anymore. It's like nature knows what happened, and it wants nothing to do with it. No resolution, true crime stories often end with some sense of justice. A verdict, a sentence, maybe even a confession that helps us understand the darkness. But not this one. There was no fight, no courtroom drama, no televised apology, only silence. Marcus Hale didn't try to hide. He wanted to be found. He wasn't proud, but he believed. And the most terrifying thing about belief is that it doesn't need to make sense. To this day, his motives remain a question without a satisfying answer. Was it mental illness? Was it a cult-like ideology he invented? Was it trauma, quiet and undiagnosed, twisting slowly for years? Or was it simply the cold reality that some people break in ways that can't be undone? No books have been written. No documentaries aired on television. Yet, because the story is too quiet, too bleak, too real, and the silence it leaves behind is louder than anything else. Final words. There are no lessons here, no call to action. No, if only we had seen the signs. Because the signs were there, and they were ignored. Because they didn't look like what we thought they would. Because Marcus Hale didn't have blood on his hands until it was too late. He had a shovel, he had a plan, and he had a smile that never meant what we thought it did.